Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Adam Aversham, the Deputy Director here at the Cozen Family Center. And I want to welcome you to this informational session on the Aizik Wolf Fellowship. And I just want to know that this is actually one of my favorite opportunities for students, actually graduating students or recently graduating students, for an opportunity in the human rights career field. This is a one-year fellowship, and it's helped spark the direction for quite a few recent graduates. We have one of those with us today in Will Jaffe, and he's going to talk about his time at Position for Human Rights, where now not only was he a fellow, but now he has a position with PHR. So it's really a delight. We're going to have opportunities. So we're going to hear from Will a little bit. Cliff is going to talk more specifics um, on the actual fellowship and who can participate and other items about what to expect. But we are so excited that you're here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it on. Actually, Pedro, I know I'm just throwing you in here for a second, and I'm excited that Pedro's here. It's kind of like a surprise. Our director of practice, Pedro Garrison, is here as well. And Pedro, do you want to say anything before we start? I don't
No,
know.
I want to learn more about this as well. But yeah, I'll introduce myself. I'm Pedro Gerson. Yeah, director of practice. So I'm excited to work on this. But yeah, I want to learn more about it and hear from William.
All right, Cliff, you ready?
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Adam and Pedro, and thank you all for joining us. Just a quick bit about the fellowship. It is a one-year fellowship that's awarded to college graduates of the college. It's awarded every other year, and it's named for Dr. Aizik Wolf, who was a graduate of the college in 1977 and has been a longtime supporter of the college. He is from Columbia and practices neurosurgery in Miami. And this fellowship has been awarded for many years, and it allows recent graduates to launch a career in human rights and spend their first year after graduation working either domestically or internationally on issues of human rights and social justice. Just so that you know, the application deadline is April 7th, and you can find the application online at humanrights.uchicago.edu. So without further ado, I want to introduce the most recent recipient of this fellowship, Will Jaffe, graduated from the college in 22, and he majored in political science and had a minor in human rights. He was involved on campus with the Transitional Justice and Democratic Stability Lab, and he was a Posen Center human rights intern for the summer of 2022. And he was awarded the fellowship in 22, and for the year of 2022 to 23, he served with Physicians for Human Rights, and that is an organization, a nonprofit human rights organization. It's committed to using expertise in the medical community to do reports, to document instances of torture and violence and persecution. So what I wanted to do is invite Will to share some of his experience, and maybe I'll just ask a few questions, then we'll take some Q&A from those of you who are here to find out more. And Will, could you just start out by telling us, why did you decide to apply for the Wolf Fellowship?
Yeah, thanks, Cliff. And it's great to see everyone today. I'm actually calling from the PHR office now. And after my fellowship, I eventually was able to continue at that organization where I'm now full-time. And I think I applied to the Wolf Fellowship um, for a few reasons. I think the first reason was I'd already had experience with the Posen Center, as Cliff mentioned, as a summer intern. And it was really a great program for starting to learn more about what does human rights look like in the field. You know, we talk about it in class and it's very theoretical, but I wanted to understand what does an actual career in human rights look like. And from that internship experience, I was then, pointed towards the Isaac Wolf Fellowship as a continuation of that, and not just continuation, but a building on everything I've learned, everything, all the internship and class experience I'd had, to again really begin and jumpstart my professional career in human rights. I think that having the year, I also knew that having the year to work at an organization like PHR, um, it was going to be a great way for myself to get my foot in the door at one of these preeminent organizations and to really start thinking ahead to the future. I I'm sure Cliff will ask a lot more questions following up on this later, but at the time I didn't exactly know what area of human rights I wanted to go into. I didn't know whether I wanted to pursue any other graduate or law school uh, building on my undergraduate experience. And um, I didn't even know necessarily what it meant to have a career in human rights. And the Posen Center, graciously gave me the opportunity to do that and to have that year through the Isaac Wolf Fellowship. That's really why I was keen to apply in the first place.
Great. Can you say more about what you did during the fellowship year at Physicians for Human Rights, and maybe a little bit about what you learned about human rights in practice?
Yeah, so I was brought on in the research department at PHR. And uh, essentially what that meant is we do a lot of different kinds of work. We work with doctors, we work on the ground with survivors of human rights violations. And these reports, for PHR at least, are a really important way of collecting those stories, collecting that data, and then presenting it to the high level people in power. So on these reports, I was able to conduct qualitative and quantitative research. I was able to oversee, for example, on a report about abortion access or just reproductive rights access in Oklahoma following the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I was able to design and oversee a research study calling hospitals and learning about their policy. I was then able to actually write a first draft of that report and worked alongside the heads of our departments of research and our medical director to really pull that report together. I was able to, as I mentioned, work on other reports, including on attacks against hospitals in Ukraine. Again, doing quantitative research, developing graphics, doing copy editing, again, writing large sections of those reports. And then towards the end of my internship, I was also given the opportunity to work alongside our advocacy and communications departments, which is a whole other side to doing human rights work in practice. It's not all just about writing and thinking about legal frameworks. It's also about helping develop narratives and bring these stories to people in power and other important human rights instruments. So I was able to actually be involved with those departments in helping uplift those two reports.
Wow, that sounds like a really impressive full year of activity. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about some of the skills maybe that you felt that you developed from all of those activities that you were participating in?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, really I needed to develop my writing skills. There's just you know, there's a lot of writing you need to do in human rights. It's all about thinking of, as we do in our own studies, as if you're a human rights major, minor, or just in general at the college, you really need to think about building uh, powerful narratives. And I think a really important part of human rights that we discuss a lot is the idea of human rights is a way in which you uplift the voices of other people. You're not speaking for them. You're speaking um, with their voice, and it's all about uplifting them. So really, um, as I as I developed material, as I wrote these reports, as I developed um, briefing papers for government officials, I really need to think about how am I bringing in our partners, how am I writing with their voice, and continuing to like coordinate with them throughout that whole time. So it really pushed me to grow as a writer first and foremost. I think the the most important skill I would say though I learned is growing to understand the human rights system to a much greater degree than I had before. Um, Human rights isn't just a legal framework that exists in kind of an abstract sense in the international space. I think that's how a lot of people talk about it, but it's human rights is really a practice. It's like I said about uplifting other people's voices, working with other communities that are oftentimes ignored. Um, but human rights is also a very complex system at the international level with the United Nations Human Rights Council, with different regional bodies across the Americas and various other regions we engage with. Really getting to work in the field in human rights, you come to appreciate all the different systems we have in place and the many different ways in which you can engage in human rights, whether that be research, whether that be advocacy, whether that be community service work. There's a lot of different ways in which we can, like I said, bring people's voices to bear and hold people accountable. Human rights is all about justice, and uh, this this fellowship experience gave me an appreciation for the myriad of different ways we can use it in our work.
That is so powerful. The importance of telling people's voice, letting people's voices be heard, the storytelling, the writing, the emphasis on justice, and how that all support goes to support all of that is just important, such an important part of the human rights endeavor and the work that sounds like it was a huge
Mom's
part of the work that you
tambourine,
did.
just all the fun stuff. My friend Meg painted this for me. It's supposed to be me.
Okay, there's somebody, there we go, thank you. Um, I'm wondering, just two more questions for you, and then we're going to open it up to questions from everyone here. So feel free to ask your questions either in the chat or by raising your hand. But before just these last two questions here, I wanted to ask you about the fellowship and how did it connect to your experience as a student? Did you feel like what you learned at U Chicago played out in some way in the work that you did at Physicians for Human Rights?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me think. I think that so for example, I both in the fellowship and now I work in the advocacy department at PHR. I've gotten to see a little bit more into the kinds of conversations that human rights advocates and also government officials are having behind closed doors about when do we prioritize specific issues? How do we approach questions of accountability and justice? How do we transfer a lot of these discussions from one country to the other? And I think these were questions I was grappling with when I was an undergraduate, because I was really interested in the concept of transitional justice, which is really the idea of after periods of conflict or after periods of authoritarianism, how do you as a country come together and heal? How do you move past it? And how do you hold perpetrators of abuses accountable? And there are a lot of different ways in which we talked about it in class. Uh, and I think that framework has been really, I both learned a lot and it's been important to keep in mind in my own work because human rights is, and the human rights bodies that exist are one of the chief ways to ensure accountability and justice. And it's one of the many different ways we can push forward transitional justice. Now when I think about the different strands of work we're doing, whether that be on conflict-related sexual violence in the DRC or attacks against hospitals in Ukraine, I take both what I learned in class about transitional justice and now my better understanding of human rights to really think about how we're thinking about accountability. So I guess that was my roundabout way of saying there's still a lot of learning to be done here in the human rights field, but what I learned from class is really guided a lot of the conversations I'm having and the way I'm thinking about the work.
It's great that there is a connection as you look backward to between theory and what is in the textbook and what was discussed in class, and then it does really connect to what you're experiencing in the field. And so this next question is asking you not to look backward, but to look forward. And how did the fellowship influence maybe your future plans or set you up for a career path?
Yeah. So I'll be honest, when I was graduating, I knew I wanted to go into human rights or at least some form of public service, but I didn't know what that would necessarily entail. And I didn't know exactly what area of human rights I wanted to pursue. I had from classes learned about so many different topics, like including transitional justice, that I was so interested in. But I felt like it was difficult to narrow down because there were so many interesting paths to choose from. I think really what this fellowship did for me is, like I've been saying, it helped me understand human rights as a practice and as a field more clearly. And most importantly, it introduced me to people who have made this their career and who I could really learn from. So, for example, the people I work with at PHR include doctors, they include lawyers, they include people with backgrounds in statistics, and seeing the types of work that they did made me think more about what their pathway was and how I could get to where they were. So now I'm actually considering applying for law school, whereas when I was graduating, I didn't have that in mind at all, because having spoken to people and learned from their experiences and actually seeing what they do now, I have a clearer image in my head of what that would actually entail. I also just want to add that when I was in the fellowship, I was again still learning and trying to figure out what I wanted to go into. I had a really great conversation with Adam, who's here on the call, reflecting on my halfway point into the fellowship. And a great piece of advice he'd given was to really use the fellowship as an opportunity to explore the different types of human rights work we were doing in our organization, both thinking about spreading into other thematic topics that maybe I wasn't covering, but also looking into other departments on the team, whether that be advocacy or communications, that I'd only touched on briefly. And I actually took that advice and I ended up working on a few projects with our advocacy team because I was curious about how the research I'd been doing was actually translated into real policy change. And when my fellowship came to an end, the organization didn't have an opportunity to continue with the research department, but they did with the advocacy. And that support and advice from the Posen Center has really jump-started my career in the immediate term where I am now, and it's also made me think more about what I want to do for the future, be that law school, be that maybe working in advocacy long term.
Cool. As I recall, you started at PHR, Physicians for Human Rights, as an intern, and then you were there for a year, and now you are working there full time. At first as a fellow and then now full time. So that's a great trajectory. I love that story. We're gonna take some questions at this time. You can either raise your hand or feel free to put your question in the chat. And just to get us started, I just want to ask Will to talk a little bit about his application process. What was that like? And maybe you can just kind of fill us in on how you approached applying for this fellowship.
Yeah, I can start on that maybe while questions filter in. Does that sound good, Cliff?
That sounds great.
Okay. So it's been a while, but looking back, I think what really, or I think likely set my application apart was I tried thinking a lot about first, what am I going to get out of it? But more importantly, why should the Posen Center care about the kind of work I'm doing? The work I did was actually ended up being relatively timely. In the work plan I built out, there were clear areas of work on Ukraine, which was relevant because the start of the invasion began, I think, maybe 6 months prior to when my fellowship began, and was even sooner than to when I was applying. And also thinking about, I ended up doing work on reproductive rights access, which was a looming issue in the lead up to the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade. And it's not like I had these ideas like immediately when I started applying, but I made sure to really sit down with the organization I chose. And it doesn't have to be an internship, like a Posen Center internship you had, or even necessarily an internship you're at currently. It could be an organization that you have reached out to, you've expressed interest in. But having a really strong work plan is important because it shows to the Posen Center that, one, you're in really good hands. The organization has really thought through how they're going to make this an enriching experience for you. And it shows them that there's a very clear work product you're going to get out of it. So you don't have to at all, I would say, choose issues solely because they're like flashy or in the news. They should be issues that are really important to you and that you have a deep connection to. And in demonstrating that, I think that will then demonstrate to the Posen Center that this is an issue they can really uplift, right? You're what the Posen Center gets to show off, and it's the work that they get to be very proud of because they get to support you, and showing that you this is an issue you're really interested in, you have a strong connection to, but you have a very clear idea of what you want to get out of it, and it can explain why it's relevant to the Posen Center. I think that's the crux of the argument you have to build, and that's what I think helped my application stand apart.
Great, and I will add that one of the ways that shows up is through the essay questions that you will submit, and then there is an organizational letter of support. So the organization that you propose to work with will be you will ask them to write a letter of support to help out confirm the outline of the project or the type of work that you might be doing using this fellowship stipend in the fellowship year. So it is an opportunity for you to think through these things and talk with a potential organization. This does not mean you have to have a job offer from the organization, but that if you were to receive this fellowship, what might you be doing with that organization? And that organization commits to support you in that while you have the fellowship. So that's a little bit about the organizational letter of support. There are also 2 recommendation letters that are requested as part of the application. You'll submit your resume as well. So thanks, Will, for suggesting that, or for talking about your application process. And Thomas, you've got your hand up. Why don't you unmute and go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, thanks for meeting with us, Will. So can you kind of walk through how you pitched the fellowship to PHR? Like, did you already have specific projects in mind that you wanted to work on, or did you kind of brainstorm with them to create a project that you would work on? Or yeah, just how did you pitch it? And were there any challenges with figuring out what you would do and what you would put on your application?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's gonna depend. So I'll talk about my experience, but I think my recommendation for everyone else is the approach is gonna depend a little bit upon your relationship with the organization. But I had a very close relationship with my supervisor because I'd interned with her for a year, and basically what we did is I let her know about the opportunity. She was very excited about it, and I made sure that when I came onto the meeting, I had a few ideas of like areas of work I was interested in, but I think you can use this as like as a fun opportunity to kind of let your imagination run wild, right? This is for the organization you join. You're going to be fully funded, and they're going to get to figure out where they want to move you to. And I think making this like an iterative process where you can kind of walk through a lot of different possibilities, gauge interest, have a real dialogue about it so that both of you are really excited about that proposal you're going to make is really important because your excitement about it is going to show through in your application, and it's going to show through in their organizational recommendation. So yes, to answer your question, what I had done is I had some ideas in mind that I had prepared, but I really I'd communicated to her that I wanted to use that meeting to really start thinking through a lot of different areas. And she's the kind of she's from academia. She's the kind of person who really wanted to run with that and have fun with it. But yeah, depending on your relationship with the organization, you might want to use a different approach. It's kind of what you think is best for getting that creative discussion started.
Thank you.
I know Noah had a very similar question. So Noah, if this does not answer your question, do pose a follow-up through the chat. Monica has her hand raised. Go ahead, Monica.
Hi, Cliff. Hi, Will. So thank you for joining us. I suppose my question is about the letters of recommendation. How tailored do we want them to this particular opportunity? Like, this project will single-handedly save the world, or is it more so like, is it okay if we have more general ones? Like, what do you think they're looking for? I don't know if you have any insight into that. So,
Will, do you want to take a stab at kind of how
Yeah.
you did it? And then I can say additionally anything that comes to my mind.
I don't know if I looked very closely at my recommenders' recommendations. Oh wow, it's been a while. I think that the people you choose for your recommendation should be someone that can speak to your work product. So if it's the internship that you just did, for example, I think they can speak really well to your like if you want to give them suggestions of things to talk about, I'd probably off the top of my mind, and Cliff, please jump in, would be, you know, talking about your interest and dedication to that area. Why is Monica interested in this specific issue? And, you know, how is she shown in her work? And then of course, like talking about work product. I don't think the Posen Center is expecting you to like solve world peace. In definitely not in a recommendation letter, but I think I think you all have good judgment. Pick someone that can really speak to your work and knows why you're so clearly interested in this subject, be it a professor or past a supervisor.
I guess the question, just like the follow-up question
Yep.
to that would be, in regards, I think like kind of like if we are proposing like a particular project with like a grassroots organization, hypothetically, I'm not sure if like letters should like speak to the suitability of like how we've worked with this org before, like the potential that like this project could do.
Oh, yes, that is that should be front and center, I think.
Okay.
In the so I guess it's like a difference of maybe like rec versus organizational proposal. That probably can be both. Yeah, Cliff, please jump in a second. But I think that in this hypothetical example of grassroots organizing, I don't know why you brought it up, but let's run with it. I think it's a great idea to focus on, even in your application, like, what does this look like? Why is this important? Why does it matter that we're engaging with this community? How has this fictional applicant, Monica, shown a dedicated interest to it? Like these are, the Posen Center, I think, like wants to know that that you're excited about this and that you and the organization have a really clear vision of how you're going to slot in, and it's going to have a real impact, right? Some of these organizations, like these grassroots orgs, don't necessarily have a lot of bandwidth or a large amount of funds, and you can be really invaluable and you can make a really important impact on the community you work with. And you don't have to be at an organization like PHR that's like a big research org. You could do direct service work. I think it's up to you and your recommender to like really think through what's the pitch, what are we delivering, why does this matter? That's the most important question. Why does this matter?
Thank you.
I'll second that in terms of, I think the reviewers will be looking for information about motivation and also information about past experience and past performance. Particularly, you'll be working in an organization. And so what kind of experience have you had? How did that go? Finding somebody who can attest to the experiences that you've had can produce a very, very powerful testimony on your behalf. And your recommenders get to brag a little bit for you. So it's totally I think one of the things to consider is the past experience, talking about your past experience and how that sets you up to succeed in a year-long fellowship. So, Pedro, I'm going to let you jump in here.
Yeah, I have a question. So thanks, Will. This has all been great to hear. I have a question with regards to the freedom that you felt you had once you were in the job, to actually do what you had envisioned to do. Was there any disconnect? Did what you were planning to do, how much did it change, right? Yeah, and to what extent was there a freedom, especially given that you kind of stayed there. And then two, the mentorship piece of this, which is, um, did you feel, how did you feel as the mentoring within the organization? And do you think that, it would be, in terms of when people are thinking what organization I'm going to be working with, right? Are there some pros and cons you can envision with someone jumping in with this kind of funding at a bigger place or at a smaller place when it comes to mentorship?
Yeah, those are great questions. I'm gonna answer you the first one about freedom, and then I'll jump into the second. Um, I think in terms of freedom, I think two things. One, having the work plan in hand, it's not just important to show the Posen Center that you have a clear direction, but it's really useful for you once you're in the fellowship. I could always point back to it if I needed to like remind my supervisors, here was the direction we're going. But what was great was that the work plan is fluid and it can change. So, for example, I always forget which ones came first that were on the work plan and weren't on the work plan, but there were like several avenues of work that shifted onto my portfolio, and things that we initially expected were going to be big issues to cover that ended up not being quite as relevant. For example, I think I'd initially been thinking of doing more immigration related work, but then that was less relevant because specific policy change we thought would happen didn't happen. And instead, we were very nimble, and I was moved on to a different project about anti-torture. And I had the ability to, because the work plan existed, to very clearly communicate with my supervisors, hey, I want to move into this, I wanted to move into that, I'm enjoying this. And if things would ever get too out of hand, which they didn't, but if they ever could, you have the structure that the work plan provides to recenter. So I think what's great about the fellowship is you're like you're free labor. You actually are free labor for the organization, and they can move you around where you want to, and you should really feel free to express that and advocate for yourself to get to what you want to do. That's like how I was not at all doing advocacy work, but I said I wanted to. They said, great, do it. It's on your work plan, but we want you to get something out of it. I think when you're looking for the organization you end up choosing, I don't think it necessarily matters about the size, but it's about the supervisor you work with. How flexible are they? I think what was most important for me is that my supervisor recognized that, yes, I'm working full time, but really this is about professional development for me. And this is why the fellowship exists. Is I needed to learn, and I needed to have the freedom to be able to move around and learn more. And they were very focused on that in the fellowship, and I was very clear about that from the get-go. So I hope that answers the first question. I'm so sorry. Can you remind me what the second question is?
Yeah, the mentorship part, so I'll give some more context just in terms of thinking of this smaller, like a smaller organization. So one potential drawback of going to a smaller organization under this kind of arrangement is because you are the free laborer, it's easy to maybe not, because in the capacities, right, are so thinned out because there's not enough people for very important work that needs to happen. There might just not be enough infrastructure for you to get mentorship. On the other hand, in a bigger place, because it's so big and they aren't paying you, then the same thing could happen, right? For different reasons. So I am just wondering, and I feel like mentorship is a very important part of an initial position. I mean, it's always important, but it is especially important there. So just wanted to hear a little bit more about the mentorship part, and then kind of, yeah, what are your thoughts, but how it's gone for you or how it went for you, and then your thoughts about how do you make sure that that you get mentored when you get if you get the job or the fellowship.
Yeah, yeah, mentorship is so important. And I get your points about like worrying of it being too big or too small. I think ultimately at the end of the day, it's really just about the person you're working for. PHR is big, but it's not that big. And it's small, but it's not that small. To give you a sense, like you could think of it in a lot of different ways, and the organization you're at will probably be in flux a lot. People leave, people come in, but the constant throughout it all is going to be your supervisor. And again, like when you're having these conversations with them, sitting down when you apply, it's really important you impress on them that, this is great for them, but this is about your professional development and you want them to be your mentor. And, a great mentor can go a really, really long way. Like the person I work for, her name's Michelle Heisler, is an amazing person. And the people I work for now are also amazing people. I think you work for amazing people in human rights in general, but they had a real focus on mentorship. So I think being very clear about that from the get-go in these early conversations is important, irrespective of whether you go big or small. Because at the end of the day, there are advantages and disadvantages for both. But I think mentorship isn't going to be affected by that decision. I think small has advantages for other things, big for, how you're moved around in the organization. But again, mentorship is based on the person you're with. So if you have a good internship connection already and supervisor that's already focused on your professional development, maybe that's a good person to talk to for the application. I don't know.
Great. Are there any other questions, comments, or items of interest? Well, we'll be willing to stay around for a little bit if you do want to chat offline. I just want to remind you that the application is due on April 7th. Adam and I are around to answer questions as you get into preparing your application. If you have more questions about the organization, if you have more questions about how to complete the application, we're happy to be available to you. And there you will find more on the website, which we have actually just redesigned. So if you haven't checked out our website recently, let me put into the chat the page for the Wolf Fellowship. And let me just thank you all very much for your participation. And we stop the recording at this point.